Good afternoon, everybody. With a quorum present, the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care Board meeting is now called to order. As a reminder, please turn on your microphone when speaking and mute when not speaking when you're in the room or on the phone. The MAG public comment process allows members of the public to comment on items on today's agenda or on items that fall under the COC's jurisdiction. If you would like to comment at today's meeting, please fill out a white request to speak card located at the information table and give it to MAG staff. If you parked in the garage, parking validators are available on the information table. If you purchased a transit ticket to come to the meeting, please see staff for a ticket. Hearing assisted devices are available from MAG staff. Before we jump in, I want to extend a warm welcome to our new board member, Sienna. If you could take a few minutes to share with us about you and what you hope to bring to the board. Welcome, Sienna.
Hi, my name is Sienna Valdez, and I'm a member of the Maricopa Youth Action Committee, and I've been with them since May. I'm also a student at ASU, and as a young person, I've had experience with homelessness and the foster care system. These experiences have made me extremely passionate about improving the resources and connections for young people. I'm so very excited to be here today and to bring the youth voice to the table. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for being here, Sienna, and I look forward to getting to know you. All right, Katie, with that, can you please call roll call? Members of the board, please say you are here and the organization you represent after Katie calls your name.
Thank you, Co-Chair Milne. Jessica Cruz. Liz DaCosta.
Hello, Liz DaCosta with Access.
Thank you. Lisa Glow.
Hello, Lisa Glow with Cass.
Chris Hallett. Michael Hughes. Natalie Lewis. Sean Pierce.
Sean Pierce, Maricopa County.
Thank you. Charles Sullivan.
Hi, Charles Sullivan, ABC Housing.
Thank you. Sienna Valdez.
Here, the Youth Action Committee.
Thank you. Cricket Weatherington.
I'm here. Hi, Arizona Housing Inc.
Thank you. Danielle Wright.
Hi, here, Danielle Wright, Arizona Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence.
Thank you. Co-Chair Rachel Milne.
I'm here. I'm representing the City of Phoenix.
Co-Chair Vicki Phillips.
Present, and I'm representing Community Bridges.
With that, you have quorum.
Thank you, Katie. Item number 2 on the agenda is the call to the audience. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that fall under the Continuum of Care Board that are not on the agenda or that are on the agenda for discussion, not for action. 15 minutes will be provided for the call to action agenda item unless the board requests an exception to the limit. Katie, were there any comments received or anyone who wishes to offer comments at this time?
There were no public comments received and no one to offer public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. We will move on to the next agenda item. Our next item is the approval of the consent agenda. Items 3A through 3E are on the agenda for consent. Does any member of the board have any questions, comments, or would like to request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing none, does any member of the public wish to comment on any of these items on the consent agenda? All right. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda items 3A through 3E?
Co-Chair, I move to approve the items on the consent agenda.
Thank you, Sean. Do we have a second?
I second.
Is that Danielle? Yeah. Okay. Wonderful. We have a motion from Sean and a second from Danielle. Is there discussion on the motion from the board or comments from the public? All right. For those in the room, we will take a voice vote. Those in favor, please say yay.
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 Those opposed, please say nay. And now I'll ask Katie to proceed with a roll call of those joining online.
Thank you, Co-Chair Milne. Jessica Cruz. Jess, I believe it's *6 to unmute. Taylor, can you unmute that phone number for us? Okay. Well, oh,
Hi, can you guys hear me?
yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Jessica Cruz, I approve.
Thank you. Liz DaCosta.
Yay.
Thank you. Charles Sullivan.
Yay.
Thank you. Sienna Valdez.
Yay.
Thank you. Danielle Wright.
Yay.
Thank you. The motion passes unanimously. Back to you, co-chair.
All right, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Item number 4, Dylan Belmont, Human Services Planner with MAG, is here to provide an update on the program performance measures, previously known as the performance standards. The measures were included as part of the packet with the informational summary and definition sheet.
All right, thank you so much, co-chairs and members of the board. Back with you again today to cover some revisions to what are now known as the program performance measures, previously known as performance standards, brought to you all last month. This is going to be a really short PowerPoint and it's super to the point. So when we talked last month, we heard some really valuable feedback from you all, summarized into these 3 bullet points. The first was a better integration of all of the information that was on that page with the system performance measures. Other being clarity around goals, right? The page before was all of those averages from HMIS that described how the system was currently performing. But there was, I don't know, I guess some, you could infer that that was implying that those standards were meant to be what programs were supposed to work toward, which wasn't necessarily reflective of that document. So, and then the other one that we wanted to work on was building those narratives, right? Like, why is this document important to our region, and how can it be continually in the conversation? So we'll hit on each one of those and how all of them have changed since the last time we heard it. And of course, this most revised version was brought to the COC committee earlier this month. And yeah, some good things. Okay, so how has it changed in relation to system performance measures? So this page on the screen right now is essentially all that was provided before when it was performance standards. These are all of the system averages of where our region is currently sitting. However, there's now a new column that provides more context as to why these indicators are being selected in the first place. So where appropriate, all of the indicators are coordinated with one of the system performance measures. That way we can go back and see, you know, if we're looking to decrease length of time homeless, some of this stuff might seem obvious, right? But it's a specific call out as to what goes into those measures. Additionally, we'll get to this on the next slide, but there is a new goals page, and where appropriate, a lot of these program performance measure goals match them directly, right? So as a region, we have goals already laid out for the system performance measures where we're looking to improve. And so by following the goals that are laid out on the next page, it would bring each provider to meeting those goals. And then lastly, the most fun part of all is that now this whole project is sort of just like running parallel to system performance measures, right? So system performance measures measure in the system, and then program performance measures, it's like at a more individual scale, right, for each program. And then, as I mentioned, there's a new page that really brings out what the goals are versus what those averages are. So this is separate from what I showed previously. It's, you know, where we're at, what we would be working to. In general, most of these goals are reflective of 5% improvements overall from the averages. So whether that is 5% increase or decrease, depending on the indicator. And then, of course, some of these indicators that we have weren't pulled from HMIS, right, or based on any existing averages. So those are pulled over from best practices documents, as we've discussed before. And then the pieces on the narrative that have changed. So the big one you might have seen in the agenda packet where the full document is included, but there are revisions made to both the introduction page and all of the definitions that provide more context as to how this data can be used and where it's most appropriate, as well as really bringing in every piece that comes off of this project into one place, right? So someone can see, I think it's a 4 or 5 page PDF overall, right? You can, anything that you're looking to get out of program performance measures, it's right there. So those parallel materials being training from Solari as to how providers can pull the reports, all of the visualizations available for both the program performance measures and the system performance measures, and then all of the definitions as well. And then lastly, this might be the most important piece, is how this project would really flourish over time, right? How things would change. And basically, it's going to look similar to how system performance measures are reviewed, right? So each quarter, the COC committee has a review of where the trends have gone and what's happening. So moving forward, aligned with the system performance measures, it'll really be an opportunity to see how all of these different indicators are shifting and trending, and what we as a community can do to continue improving them. I did promise to keep it super short. So that's all I have. But like I said, the full document is included in the packet. We'd love any additional feedback and are seeking approval.
Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate you taking all of the feedback from the last meeting and really doing a comprehensive reboot of the measure. So thank you so much. Are there any comments or discussion from the board?
This is Liz. I just wanted to echo that. Thank you so much. So you absolutely listened to all of our feedback and then incorporated it into these updates. I think they're fantastic. When we look at the goals that they're trying to achieve, it does align with our goals as it relates to system performance measures. So this will be really good for our system. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz. Any other comments from the board? All right, with that, could I have a motion to approve the program performance measures?
I move to approve the system performance measures, right?
Program performance
Program
measures. Very close. Good. Thank you, Cricket. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Chris. We have a motion from Cricket and a second from Chris. Is there a discussion of the motion from the board or comments from the public? All right, for those in the room, we'll take a voice vote. All those in favor, please say yay.
Yay.
Any opposed, please say nay. Katie, will you proceed with a roll call of those joining online, please?
Jessica Cruz,
Yes.
thank you. Liz DaCosta,
Yay.
Charles Sullivan,
Yay.
Sienna Valdez,
Yay.
thank you. Danielle Wright,
Yay.
the motion passes unanimously. Back to you, co-chair.
Thank you. The program performance measures will be posted on the website, and in the coming weeks, there will be training rolled out in the learning management system on how to pull reports out of HMIS and the visualization of the community standards. With that, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Thanks, Dylan. Agenda item number 5, Nathan Smith, Chief Program Officer with Phoenix Rescue Mission, is here today to provide an overview of the gaps analysis they completed in partnership with From the Ground Up. Welcome, Nate.
Thanks everybody for having me here at the COC board meeting. It's a real privilege to be able to share the data that we gathered with such a group of decision makers and people who've been involved in this kind of work at so many levels. Just as a little bit of background Phoenix Rescue Mission a couple of years ago under relatively new leadership and in light of the COVID-19 pandemic was asking the question, what are we supposed to be doing for the future? A time to take a step back and reassess what we're supposed to be doing with our programs as the world is shifting and as we're under, again, new leadership. But we did this wanting to do a couple of really important things. First, we wanted to make sure that we heard from the people who are working in or experiencing the problems that Phoenix Rescue Mission works in. And so our study touched on homelessness, substance abuse, and food insecurity, which are the three primary areas of focus for Phoenix Rescue Mission. So we wanted to get some information that would be really useful for us in our own strategic planning for the future as an organization. But we wanted to make sure that if we were going to put together a really professional methodology that would gather useful data for us to make some important decisions around, that we did so in a way that would allow us to make a meaningful contribution back to our region so that our region could have some data to work with as well. And as you all know, the data sets that we have available, when you put them all together, they can be really useful. But it's always helpful to have an influx of data that may ask some very specific questions on our topics that might not get asked in the data gathering that we have on offer today. So Phoenix Rescue Mission got with from the ground up consulting. We put together this survey. It took us a whole lot of time and a lot of money, and we offer this to you as the community today. I'm gonna hit buttons, they're gonna work. So the sample, which we'll look at on the next slide, was again heavily sourced from people experiencing the problems that we're looking at. And we went to the 10 biggest cities in Maricopa County and gathered over 12 regional partners. The people that we talked to were not only folks experiencing the problems themselves. As you can see up on the screen, there are 754 people experiencing homelessness, 205 people at food banks. Down a ways, you'll see that there were 62 people experiencing addiction who were not currently homeless. So as you see, we clearly targeted people affected by the problems. However, we touched on a variety of other perspectives as well. For instance, since we were doing some research for our own campuses, we gathered information from staff and clients at our own campuses, the Transforming Life Center and Changing Life Center. We talked to elected officials and city staff members, business owners, neighborhood leaders, faith partners, and one of my favorite groups of people to gather insight from whose perspectives were very different from others was direct service providers. So in other words, we asked 1,465 people from across a whole bunch of different perspectives. What do you all think about these issues? And the overarching questions that we were asking, both numbered one, I keep forgetting to change that on the screen, are what are the available resources and unmet needs in this area? And how can Phoenix Rescue Mission be a partner in meeting those needs? So I'll go over a small subset of the data. There's a whole lot more on a much bigger slide deck. And then there's a whole lot more data that will never make a slide deck. It's just basically use it to answer questions that you guys come up with. So understand that there's a lot more behind this. I'm going to situate your eyes on the screen in a couple of places at the top and at the bottom. So at the top, you'll see on slides that look like this, the question that was asked. And at the bottom, you'll see the stakeholder group that it was asked of. And on the right, you'll see the sample of people who responded to this question. Again, there were 754 people experiencing homelessness, but 155 of those people did not respond to this particular question. But we got a big sample, nearly 600. And when asked this question, what's the primary reason you ended up not having a place to stay? The majority of people cite a response that we code as an economic factor. So what people did on a question like this is gave an open-ended response. We took those responses and coded them into the categories that you see on the left. So people mentioned things like loss of a job, lack of work, not having enough money as economic factors. But if you skip down a bit to number 4 and you see what I would call a macroeconomic factor, it's still an economic factor, including so number 4, lack of affordable housing, had responses where people talked about their rent went up and they were no longer able to afford it, or just generally that there were a lack of affordable units that were out there. So again, not that that was mind-blowing information, but it was insightful coming from this particular audience. And so when you add those two things together, what you're seeing is economic factors are actually huge. Take into account even further, if you look at other top responses in order of frequency, that there are eviction and landlord issues, many of which can have something to do, not all, but something to do with finances. And what you're finding here is that people don't have enough money to live. And that's a huge problem. But what in the other responses, and sometimes they would be compounded. Matter of fact, oftentimes there would be more than one kind of response, but we would pick which one leaned more heavily. So for instance, some people would say something like, on number 3, I would say, they had economic issues and then they lost a loved one. So they were already facing poverty, already facing issues with their tenancy. And then it all hit the fan when someone passed away, they lost motivation, they gave up. So there's a combination of when you're already on that economic line, let something happen to you in your life and it'll push you over the edge potentially. We wanted to make sure though that we shared the voices of the people who responded to the survey. And so up on the screen, I'll give you a second to read them, are some direct quotes that people responded with in this question. So there you can see again, not all of these are completely straightforward. The one at the bottom in the middle, my mom died, was living with her and didn't have anywhere else to go. There is a death of a loved one and an economic situation at play there. We wanted also to ensure that our data wasn't just like way off the wall. Sometimes you get these fringe people out there, they go out and collect data and it's all over the place. So if some of you have been around a while can remember the big Morrison Institute study on homelessness that was done here locally, it's for a while seemed like the best thing that we had. And if you look at the responses that came as top 3 issues for homelessness then, or top 4 then, compared to our top 3, they're basically the same. Especially when you consider that health and substance abuse these days are combined under healthcare. So really, we're talking about the same kind of stuff, which means that the problems we're facing are persistent and you might argue are growing. Shelter's a big deal here also. If you look at the data over time, especially going back to say 2014, up until probably just this last pit count, the percentage of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness has continued to rise at a very high rate, just according to the pit count alone. So we wanted to ask some questions around why are people not accessing shelter? And this is about all kinds of shelter. Everything is on the list here. And when we ask the question of people experiencing homelessness, if you're not currently in a shelter, why not? Many people, about half, cited themselves specifically having a negative experience with shelter. If you look at other top responses at the very bottom, the top one there, negative perception of shelter, can kind of go with that. So that's people who didn't themselves cite a negative experience, but cited someone else's negative experience or other people's negative experience that had caused them to not want to go into shelter. So you can see that there are some experience issues, but then there's some accessibility issue there as well. So in number 2, shelters are inaccessible. So I do commend our region for doing a lot of work here and popping up a whole bunch of shelters that meet a lot of these issues. So there's less overcrowding now that we can spread them out some. There are different rules, more accommodating rules, as you see addressing number 3 there, that allow for people to have any number of situations and still have shelter accessible. So our region is already doing a lot about this, and I would say it's moving in the right direction according to this data, and more should continue to be done. And when we ask people experiencing homelessness and addiction about their substance abuse, what's been the most challenging part in receiving help, something associated with pride and not wanting to and not able to get over themselves or get over the hump, or shame and not being able to face the situation came back a ton. That people are just, they're over life. They're over themselves. They don't think they're good enough. They don't think they have the power. They don't think they have the resources. They just don't have the motivation to take the first step. People just sounded very frequently defeated when talking about substance abuse. And now as a substance abuse provider, For us, what that means is at that front door and before the front door, just as a quick, here's what we do about that. That has forced us to look very, very hard at making sure that when we approach individuals who are facing these sorts of issues and they come back to the gate, they come back in for treatment, that we make sure that they come to a very non-threatening environment and a very non-judgmental environment, because that is the thing that when they hit the gate and they meet case manager so-and-so in bad mood, and case manager so-and-so in bad mood says the wrong kind of thing, like, oh, you're back. Simple as that. That's the kind of thing that has them turn back out of the door in shame. So everywhere from outreach through the door and through the continuum needs to address the pride and shame factor, which is highly prevalent in the substance abuse population. Also there, familial issues keep people in homelessness, and a lack of support system is a problem with substance abuse, as you see. So you're seeing issues be similar across problems. So across homelessness and addiction, the support system and service accessibility are things that come up. And here's some quotes. One of the things we talk about in COC committee a lot, especially in addressing the gaps in our system, is, and we talk about this all over the place, and being available to progressively engage. So people's situations change. Sometimes they change after the funding ends and their situation is still changed. So there's got to be ways for us to stay tapped in. If you look at the top right, I was clean for a while, but then lost our house and kids. God only knows how far after they stopped working with service providers that happened. We've got to make sure that we are still available and accessible when those situations come up long after we've been done working with people. And going quickly through a couple of other perspectives. So when we talk to elected officials, city staff, and first responders about homelessness, they frequently cited partnerships as something that's working, and frequently cited lack of public education and awareness as something that's not. And when you asked the question of a different group of people, business leaders, case managers, direct service providers, again, partnerships are working. And among the things over there, public education and awareness is not. When you ask certain groups of people, like business leaders and neighborhood owners, they say lack of public education and awareness is NIMBYism, not in my backyard. People think the problems are way different than they really are. And if we just get some education to them, that would be better. Whereas other people will cite the fact that, so government officials say people don't know about the resources that are available. And case managers say all our clients know about the resources that are available. So it can look a little bit different depending on who you're talking to. My thing I figured out was, well, case managers' clients all know about resources. So we need to make sure that the people out there whose job it is to not memorize all these resources know how to get to the case managers who will boost the level of knowledge that their clients have. And that is the last slide on the deck. So I'll stop there and take any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, Nate. That was amazing. Thanks for bringing that here to us today. Do any members of the board have any questions for Nate?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. This is Vicky. Nate, thank you for the information. I think it's really important. And your survey really revealed, the internalized stigma that is still present, right, with addiction. I think the other important strategy was the use of trauma-informed care strategies and approaches when dealing with individuals who are struggling with, comorbid, trimorbid issues. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Always impressive, Nate. That was a great presentation and really succinct. I'm curious about what other ways you're looking at using it, because I think it can be that public education, information. I mean, not just for your agency, but what are some other ways you guys might be looking at using this?
Yeah, so, well, the first thing that we're doing is, as the mission, taking the show on the road. So I don't know how useful it is to people until I get out there and then they say certain things about it. So I've now done probably 7 or 8 of these presentations. And and just trying to get it out there because I do think that it would be great to duplicate the methodology in other places. So like, for instance, there's gaps. We didn't study rural areas because Phoenix Rescue Mission doesn't work directly in rural areas. Somebody should study rural areas. We didn't study PMO or balance of state doing this because that's not where we work. But it'd be useful to do that. So I've been talking to people who have that scope to see if there's anything that they would want to do there. But more than anything, I mean, we're talking to funders, foundations, everybody to just get this information to them.
Any other comments from the board? Any comments from the public? All right. Well, thank you, Nate. We really appreciate you being here today and sharing that with us. All right, item number 6, I will now turn it over to Katie to provide an update on the Pathways Home and the work completed over the past quarter. In addition, we will have Daniel Davis provide us an update on the work of Threshold.
Thank you. As part of our ongoing commitment to you all, we are bringing this to you on a quarterly basis prior to bringing it to Management Committee and Regional Council. So with that, I'm really just going to give you a brief overview of the presentation, walk through continuum of care efforts that I hope you all know about, but this is in part to educate our elected officials and city managers. Talk about Pathways Home, and I'll turn it over to Daniel and then talk through some next steps. So on the continuum of care, if you have not seen all of our emails, we have an annual notice of funding opportunity out right now in the community. The notice of funding opportunity was released at the beginning of July 5th, and we are now hard at work moving that forward. The local application is due next week, August 8th. And if individuals are interested in applying, we are holding an office hours next week, or not next week, tomorrow on August 1st at 4 p.m. Registration is available on our website. The full application is due September 28th, and we will be bringing it back to you all on September 25th for your approval, with rank and review on September 6th, which you all approved in your consent agenda earlier today. Few updates on the action plan. This is a graph that you all have continued to see time and time again. I'm really moving the work forward of all of the different steps of the action plan. With that, I am going to highlight specifically one of those middle columns on the underway work and hand it over to Daniel Davis to talk about the work of Threshold.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been a functioning adult all day and then I just choked on my water, so please forgive me. It's quite an honor to be here with all of you, esteemed colleagues, madams, co-chairs of the board. We're really excited to be able to present how the past year and a half of services have gone with Threshold, which is Maricopa County's centralized landlord engagement liaison service. Boom. Not going to spend a lot of time here on this. What is Threshold? If you haven't heard, I think I've been on like 15 of these different meetings, so there's got to be one in the archive somewhere. But in short, Threshold is the centralized landlord liaison service for housing programs in the Maricopa County regional or Maricopa regional continuum of care. We officially launched June 1st of last year. So this is our, to borrow Nate's term, our roadshow for our annual impact report. We're trying to tell you all about what's been going on, how we've spent the money, what's been successful, and what we're learning from. The main thing is that while there was a gap analysis during the regional strategy to end homelessness development, and when you guys were all putting that together, some sort of centralized nexus for landlords to come to the table was identified as a huge gap. Many of you know that in 2020, Home Inc. and UMOM did a survey of 103 different landlord entities asking, what will it take to work with the homeless system? And all of the answers were pretty unanimous as to what it would take, what the problems are, where the gaps are. We took that again on a roadshow, and I do just want to unashamed shout out to co-chair Rachel Milne, who displayed some exemplary leadership and strategic thinking and planning in developing and getting this in front of the right people and getting this funded for our whole region instead of having to worry about jurisdictional issues or which programs or providers will be in or out. And obviously you all know she has some sort of thrill issues and she went over to City of Phoenix after that. So still grateful to have her obviously leading so much of this. What we did after we had funding committed to us, we went to the Arizona Multi-Housing Association. Often the people seen on the other side of the table, right? It's tenants advocates versus the landlords and the businesses. And we said, okay, this is what you all said it would take to come and work with the homeless system. And how do you want us to do this effectively, right? So we developed an advisory council and we asked them specifically what the solutions will be. We've implemented them and this is how it has gone. We want to take the opportunity to do an annual report to also take a deep dive into some data analysis. How does the homeless system perform in comparison to the housing market? There's a ton of different indicators that we use, but the simplest one is going to be the average rental amount that we have here in Maricopa County. So Phoenix means, just like it does colloquially, greater Phoenix. You could see that there's an inverse, not even correlation, it's definitely a causation when we're looking even before this in our data. As rent rises, which is the kind of the pulse that we have on if the market's too tight, if there are units available, what the quality is, et cetera, how many people are moving into Phoenix, all those different things result in supply and demand. The price goes up. The amount of people that we're able to house substantially goes down. So Mike Shore, CEO at Home Inc., has a little principle that, to his chagrin, I have named the donut litmus test, which is you could tell where the market is on who's bringing donuts to who. And so often, we used to, especially 2009 to 2014, we had donuts in our offices all the time. Like, we need tenants. We want your rental subsidy programs. And, obviously now with Threshold, we're the ones delivering donuts. And here's what we've seen. So again, we did our hard launch June 1st, 2022, but we did a soft launch that started recruiting and hiring and paying out incentives October 1st, 2021. You'll see that even though the rental market actually continued to tighten at a historic level, and actually that spike there is the worst spike in the nation for that quarter, we were able to start housing people right away. And obviously, the services and the different resources I talked about are a big part of that, but I want to explain specifically why. And this has been a really great, eye-opening experience for us. Well, the colors are all crazy on this, so I apologize. They, in my version, they are our brand guide material. So, but you could tell the green color on the bottom is the amount of placements or people moving into permanent housing in a housing program at a property that has worked with the homeless system before. So you could see that every year we do get new partners in the homeless system. Generally, it's actually clients going out there with their vouchers and, talking to places they have lived before or that are close in proximity to where they've lived before. And the biggest problem we have is that as the number goes down for a multitude of reasons, the overall placements go down. So we continue to recruit new people, but we just cannot keep them. There's also the housing market change in 2021, partially due to COVID, the eviction moratorium, but mainly due to out-of-state investment, saw an insane amount of ownership changes, literally 5 times the amount Home Inc. saw the year before. And a lot of this led to real estate investment trusts, also known as REITs, coming to Phoenix with these broad no voucher policies. This was obviously something that source of income discrimination protections and a lot of the different legislative agendas have focused on. And what we've learned is that the homeless system has generally been dependent on the same units. I remember during COVID, Michelle Alberti from a New Leaf told me that, we need people to go homeless so that we can end homelessness. It's this cycle of, the same exact apartment that's about to be vacated is going to be filled by another person with a voucher. Again, here's where Threshold launched. We assumed that would continue downward, but we had, these colors are crazy. We had a twofold strategy. One was to stop the bleeding. That's the lighter green teal color on the right. Those are actually, we've drastically increased our retention to partners that we gained in our first year. And then the next two shades of green are, I'm sorry, I don't know my colors very well, apparently. But the bright green in that kind of more transparent version of the same color are our new partners and how many placements we've had at new properties that have never worked with the homeless system before. And so the trajectory, and I can dive into that a little bit more if you guys have any questions, but by recruiting new entities that have never worked with us before, focusing on their executive levels and talking about what the incentives are, what the risk mitigation funds are, what the overall financial benefit of working with the homeless system is from the top down has meant that we've brought on whole organizations, AMC, Asset Living, Chamberlain and Associates. We're meeting with Graystar right now. And so instead of doing like one or two properties and really trying to fill those up, we're onboarding hundreds of properties at a time. Inside of the annual report, there's a timeline on the first page showing, we did an Asset Living onboarding where we brought on representatives from about 200 properties. Not all of them came on, but we were able to engage with them on substance use questions, like how the homeless system works, and why people generally aren't successful sometimes their first time being housed. So it's been a really great speaking point also for the homeless system. I'm going to have to unfortunately breeze through these. We started with, before we launched, we did 3 focus groups with people either who were recently housed, are currently searching, or are in shelter waiting for their voucher. And most of them even had just started searching. But the gist, there's no surprises here, but it's really important to let these indicators be our guiding stars. So the feedback was unanimous: more units, better units in more locations, especially close to social and communal supports, and then better owner operator partners. So we focused on those, and in the past 18 months, we have brought on 1,036 new properties accepting rental assistance vouchers that have never worked with the homeless system before. We focused especially on geographical diversification, so decentralizing everybody from the I-17 corridor, and we all know like those properties that everybody has historically moved to. We wanted everybody to move back to places where they came from, close to their jobs, close to their families, their churches. So we increased the amount of cities that were working with us from 5 to 16. Zip codes went from 74 to 113. And we had 92 available units on any given day in 2020. And today that number is 1,154. The highlights of that have meant that we're at full utilization for rental assistance vouchers. I talked to some rapid providers last week, and they have like 10 or less searchers, most of them. Whereas we used to have 690 searchers a day with those 92 units. We now have less than 250 looking amongst the almost 1,200 units. The success rate has gone up in 2 years from 65% to 89%. So that's somebody who gets a voucher, their likelihood of finding a home before the voucher quote unquote expires. With new partners, we've had 1,250 new move-ins just to those properties. And all of this has led to a 7-day shorter housing search and placement time. We're actually closer to 20 days now. So we've gone down almost 25%, which is about 8,000 days that people are in a home instead of the backseat of their car or under the overpass. The incentives have been an incredible thing. Obviously, everybody loves money. So let's talk about it. We have used incentives to house, there's 3 categories that somebody can qualify for an incentive. The average incentive amount has been $2,000. The majority in our first year were to reduce rent down until those FMRs came up. We all remember that day. We have also paid property managers to just try out working with vouchers, get the experience of what it's like to have risk mitigation funds, in-home supportive services, rental subsidies. And then we've also paid down screening criteria, and I can validate that all of these have been verified. We have the screening program printout from all of their applications saying does not qualify. And we're able to overcome that for people with insufficient income or criminal history or a history of evictions. We did a service provider survey, and the top answers as to what the most valuable contributions have been. What have you seen in your programs? The financial incentives, the number one is the financial incentives as a tool for my team to mitigate housing barriers. Again, people, especially, we have sex offender level 3 status, usually had to go to one of 2 properties. And now we've been able to actually spread people out regardless of what their barriers are. Having a team solely dedicated to outreaching owners and operators, risk mitigation funds, and then training and support for provider staff. I'll just quickly do this one. This is feedback from the direct support providers and then managers on up to executives. Threshold's easy to understand, resonated really well with case managers. We spent a lot of time on that. It's easier to lease up participants, really resonated with the people planning and forecasting for their grants. And then you could see that we're recruiting the number of units with the right bedroom sizes and then that are close to public transit. And so I'll just leave you all with this. I hate to be that George Bush meme where it's like mission accomplished, right? But a little bit, like we did it, it worked. Honestly, we were fighting like we were shadow boxing. There was nothing before, so it's going to be hugely successful. But you could tell by what the tenants have said, providers and the owners and operators, incentives, risk mitigations, centralized support, a 24-hour hotline. Thank you, Rachel, for forcing that on us. It's actually working. Are all really resonating with these new partners and have actually brought, again, the leadership on that side, that lobby for the owners and operators into our fold. So it's become this common table. The next step I would say also is to make sure that in our strategic planning as a region that we're incorporating owner and operators feedback. So many times, and I knew this when we had interviews with property managers when I was at UMOM, we have people wanting to give others second chances and third chances and fourth chances and want to help people who've been through hard times. But especially independent owners and operators, they can't float $16,000 worth of damages. They can't float arrears. So that's a place where we can step in and make sure that this is something that is a business solution holistically for them. All right, I think that's it. I just want to say a big thank you. Our first year is over. You guys have all been great champions of us. So I really appreciate also the time that Katie Gentry now doesn't have. So, okay, questions or just moving on?
I'll come back to you. You can stay though. Want to finish wrapping up pathways and then give you time to ask questions. About 3 months ago now, we launched technical assistance in partner with USICH and a federal official who is based here in Phoenix, working full-time in partnership with us. His name is Kent. He is a full-time employee with SAMHSA, and part of his role, he's a federal official at the local level. He is connecting us with a network of federal teams, and our focus here in Maricopa is 7 different items really focused on encampments and communication around encampments, shelter coordination, regulatory relief, funding and better coordinating around funding, coordination with our tribal partners, and then a public health response. So there is more that will come with that, but wanted that to be on y'all's radar, and an info page was also included in your packet. Really excited that we've been collecting letters of commitment from all of the local jurisdictions to date, although I just got an email with another one during this meeting, is over $263 million in cash match, 17 million in kind, and 82 million in other cash match, totaling over 362 million for FY 23-24. Gonna get a little bit more daunting. I just want to bring to your attention that we have 19 people who are newly experiencing homelessness for every 10 people finding housing. And so when I go to the next slide, note that it is really difficult to continue to reduce homelessness when we're seeing more and more people coming into homelessness every single month. This is based off of the last fiscal year, so July 2022 through June of 2023. So when we are thinking about our housing targets, our initial projections when we started Pathways Home was creating 770 temporary units and 1,225 permanent housing units. And those have shifted. We've really responded in our temporary housing space, creating more shelters. So still need an additional 431 temporary units in order to, that's shelter, transitional housing, in order to reduce homelessness by 25%, but need even more permanent housing than ever before, needing 1,463 units for those experiencing homelessness right now. As we continue to talk through next steps, we're going to continue to look at the USICH technical assistance and really starting to utilize that to the fullest potential and continuing to implement the work of Pathways Home and all of what is included in phase 2. So with that, I will turn it back to the co-chairs for questions.
Thank you, Katie and Danielle, for the presentations. Are there any comments or questions from board members?
I just wanted to understand the 24/7 line a little bit.
Yes, we have a 24-hour hotline for owner and operator partners. One of the big appeals, and my last slide touches on this, the in-home supportive services are huge for owners and operators. But the homeless system is very complex, even for people who are, on this call. And so understanding who the case manager is, when there was staff turnover, what happens? Why didn't I get my rent paid? I thought this person left a month ago. Why are there people in my home? All those questions can come to us. Usually they end up coming to me so that I can help that person navigate the issue and the problem. We do have a general policy of like, hey, if this is a mental health crisis or if there's an emergency, follow your standard safety protocols. But we have an agreement with all of our provider partners, as you know, that says that when somebody calls us and requests more in-home support for a tenant, that we can reach out to the director of those programs, who will then ensure that that person receives the help that they need. And that all happens through the hotline, instead of this operator having to understand, is this a UMOM client? It's ABC. Wait, ABC isn't the right. So understanding all the complexities of it, we want to take that out of their hands. So
Thank you. Communication is everything for sure, so people don't fall through the cracks. So it's great. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Thank you, Katie and Daniel. Just tremendous work. And for those of you on the phone, Daniel handed out a very snazzy 1-year annual report that has the right color scheme that we'll get out to all of you guys so you can see it. But just tremendous work. Thank you, Daniel. All right. Thank you. We can move on to our next item. I'll turn it back over to Katie to provide an overview of the strategic plan. Katie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rachel. Before I jump into an overview of the strategic plan, really excited to announce that we launched a new page on our website, which is a strategic plan landing page. So it's an overview of the strategic plan. It gives you kind of a summary, and then all of these progress reports are also uploaded. So that will continue to be updated and is linked there. So if you go to our website under the Continuum of Care, it's called Strategic Plan. Really creative, I know. So I want to talk about where we're at with the 4 areas of the strategic plan. This past quarter, we recruited new members to both the board and the Youth Action Committee. You all reviewed and approved your governance charter. We completed the gaps analysis and we kicked off the NOFO. You also reviewed and approved the community adopted best practices, which really the committee was responsible for. Moving into this quarter, we are currently underway with recruiting members for race equity. Those will get approved in August. ESG is continuing to align on their funding. We are, as I mentioned earlier, in the throes of the NOFO application, which will be due September 28th. Both the COC and ESG written standards will come to you all in August for approval, and the HMIS data policies will come in August as well. As far as the system performance measures, there has been a number of activities this quarter that have been completed. The homeless prevention tool was created and used. 6 coordinated entry evaluation work group meetings were reviewed. Happened around the assessment tool and working through next steps with the VI SPDAT. The data analytics presentation to 3 different committees. We addressed a bunch of data issues regarding the by name list, completed steps needed to move forward the work of the Move On work group, and then move forward a bunch of stuff with Dwell, really launching out the initial data uploads and next steps with that. This quarter, there is a whole lot of activities that are still underway. Domestic violence integration on coordinated entry, continuing to work with the VI SPDAT and continuous improvement with that assessment tool. We anticipate having more feedback ready for you all in your August board meeting. The data committee is continuing to do understanding of who is not in HMIS and how do we get more folks enrolled into HMIS as providers and increasing by name list understanding. Within local jurisdiction, they are working on partnerships with Threshold, as Daniel mentioned, and continuing to increase rental units and expanding employment opportunities. The Race Equity Committee is working on a quarterly report on policy changes that they will be bringing to you in the future. And the committee is continuing to work on really understanding the other systems of care and how we ensure that other systems of care understand the homeless response system and vice versa. How do we get people really not returning to homelessness because they're plugged into those other systems of care, as well as continuous review of both the system performance measures and your newly approved program performance measures. Lastly, the Outreach Collaborative will be relaunching in August. Anticipate if you are interested, a meeting invitation on that, where they're continuing to plug into other partners. The Move On work group will be launching their pilot to really try to see how can we move folks on to open up more PSH openings. And then Dwell is continuing with their request for proposal that they anticipate releasing in the next month or so. Moving on to monitoring, evaluation, and technical assistance, we did 2 additional on-site monitoring visits in quarter 2. We have continued to refine the program performance metrics, provided technical assistance to lower scoring agencies, and then launched the learning management system, which has over 50 trainings included. This quarter, we anticipate rolling out those approved performance measures that were approved today. Ongoing technical assistance to all of our agencies that are COC funded and not COC funded, and then continuous content creation within the learning management system. If you are not onboarded as a partner, please reach out to us. We would love to get you licenses in the system. Under communication, coordination, and strategy, we've continued to make those updates, including the addition of the strategic plan page. Really understanding data available. We have rolled out multiple trainings within the learning management system about what data is available and how to read and understand that data. And then we completed the youth homelessness demonstration project and applied for that at the end of June in partnership with our YAC. This quarter, we anticipate rolling out our Shelter Bill of Rights in partnership with the Lived Experience Committee, finalizing the communications plan and bringing that to you all for approval, and then continuing to work through the 4 action steps within the Race Equity Plan. Some additional CLC activities that you should know about. The quarterly trends report is coming to you all next quarter. We're continuing to evaluate data requests and access to data as more individuals have become interested in all of the data that we have available, and a series of affordable housing webinars, with the next one being in early fall. So with that, I will pause and turn it back to you, Co-Chair Milne.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any comments or questions from the board or the public?
I just want to say, Katie, you're doing a really great job, you and your team. So thank you. Since I've been involved with the COC, it's really come a long way.
I would like to echo that. I was just sitting here thinking about being in this room 6 years ago. And even though I get frustrated sometimes and grouchy about stuff, like this is leaps and bounds ahead of where we were. So I know it's not easy to do either, especially when you got people like me calling and complaining about every little thing. So I want to acknowledge that you all are doing an amazing job. So thank you.
This is Vicky. I want to just echo that as well. I mean, I think your presentation really is comprehensive. It covers just a wide variety of different areas. I think the learning management system is just going to do wonders, you know, and really consolidate the education and information and really get a lot of the outreach workers, the housing workers, everyone in the field really operating off that same informational guideline. So thank you for the knowledge transfer and for the work you all are doing.
Must have talked too much. Yes, thank you, Katie, and entire MAG staff for all you do. I echo everything everyone has said. It is light years from where we were several years ago. So thank you. All right, moving on to the next agenda item. Agenda item number 8. Earlier this month, as Katie has talked about, HUD released our annual NOFO. The board makes recommendations to the Rank and Review Committee each year to consider when reviewing the applications. So included in your packet today were the recommendations from last year for our consideration, as well as will be displayed on the screen momentarily. And I'd just like to open it up to the floor for discussion on this year's recommendations that the board will make to the Rank and Review Committee, and then turn it over to Katie.
Thank you, Rachel. Included in your packet was the recommendations from last year, and they're also on your screen. Just want to see, we have a couple of guiding questions to see how you all want to make priorities for this upcoming year in 2023. This is really, really critical specifically for Rank and Review to understand where your priorities lie so that when they bring you forward Rank and Review lists, it makes it much easier for them to put them in order for you and really be in alignment with your recommendations. So I'm going to quickly talk through last year's recommendations. The first thing, these were in order of highest recommendation first, so 1 through 5 does matter. Number 1, preference to renewal projects who score highly on the notice of funding opportunity local scorecard. So people who were renewal, who were high scoring, you want to keep them first. Number 2, for lower scoring renewal projects, identify if there is a drop-off cliff that separates lower scoring from higher scoring. So for example, if you had all of the higher scoring in the 70s and you had somebody in the 50s, that was where that cliff identified. For projects beyond the cliff, preference to permanent supportive housing projects over rapid rehousing projects, as we would need to rehouse folks versus closing out the project before the end of the grant cycle. Number 3, take into consideration the number of family and single beds in comparison with the family and single population within the system using homelessness trends report data. Number 4, partial reallocations could be considered if the need presents itself. And number 5, take into considerations the need to rehouse folks that are in permanent housing versus closing out a rapid rehousing project before the end of the grant cycle. So gonna pose some questions for you, and I will pose all of them for you to think about, but then we will walk through each of them. Would you like to keep the priorities currently identified? So do you like these? Do you want to move away from them? How do you feel about reallocations, and especially for grants that did not spend down their funding in the previous year? Where would you like to prioritize infrastructure, so coordinated entry and HMIS expansions within your prioritization? And then where would you like to prioritize new housing projects within your prioritization?
Well, I'm glad you're going to break these down one by one, but as far as rapid rehousing, there's such a great continuing need and for ongoing rental assistance. So I'm putting that out there. Where does that fall in the prioritization? Because with a lot of new projects opening, and where does that fit right now? Rapid rehousing.
So as of right now, are you talking about new rapid rehousing projects or current? So right now it's just renewals. There's not a preference between rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. It's whoever is high scoring. So they fall in slightly different scorecards based off of acuity. So Rapid is held to a slightly different standard than PSH for certain metrics. But that scorecard was approved back in March. Looking at Dylan. So then beyond that, when you're in the lower scoring projects, so projects that are not as high scoring, there is a preference for permanent supportive housing over rapid rehousing, is what you all decided last year. That isn't to say you have to keep that. That's where you all decided last year. You last year did not give direction on new projects, which is why this year we are looking for, where's your recommendation on new projects? Keep in mind that your annual renewal demand for this year with the new NOFO, you did not get any more money. So in order to fund new projects, you have to cut projects that are currently being funded by the COC. So we have $35.3 million. And right now, the projects that are being funded fill that $35.3 million.
So I'll just say what I would like to see, because I was actually talking to another provider today about rapid rehousing, and there's a disincentive for new providers to apply, because if it's an automatic renewal for everything that's already there, why would new providers who can be really competitive in the arena even apply? So that's my opinion, is we would want to base the judging of rapid rehousing on the submittals themselves, not an automatic renewal for people who continue to get it, because then what's the incentive to even apply for rapid rehousing if there's very little likelihood?
Just one quick question. The bonus funding that we got last year, does that become a part of our annual renewal or no? How does that work?
Yeah, so last year we received 2 new projects, a domestic violence project and a domestic violence rapid rehousing project and a regular rapid rehousing project. All of that is now included in our $35.3 million. But HUD allows, in this year's NOFO, 93% is part of tier 1, which is relatively safe unless you submit a project that is not eligible for expenses. Tier 2, which is your COC bonus, is 7% of this year's application. So that is tier 2. It's competing against the rest of the country. Last year, we did receive both of our projects. We received all of our tier 2. 2 of them were new projects and 2 of them were renewal projects that fell into our tier 2.
All right. And so then, Lisa, what I'm understanding you to say is you think that rapid rehousing projects in the entire rank and review process should be held to a different standard than PSH, or just the renewal project shouldn't compete?
Well, I'm not really sure I can opine as much on the PSH. I'm speaking more about the rapid rehousing and, really, how do you compete if everything is always just going to go to the same people and it's not really open to any new providers? And I don't know if that's the same thing with PSH.
I think everything is a competitive nature. So that's why we talked about here that kind of like cliff, and that is where there was question last year. You end up having to reallocate past projects for new projects. So that's where we're asking you all to consider, are those new projects infrastructure projects? Are they new housing projects, whether that's rapid or PSH? Here last year, you all said PSH was a preference. Renewal PSH was a preference to new rapid because you had to rehouse those people who were in permanent supportive housing versus people at the end of their rapid. If we defunded a rapid project, we would close those people out. We wouldn't have to move those people to a new project. So if we close down a PSH project, part of our work at the COC in tandem with that nonprofit is finding where are we moving those to, and if it is a voluntary reallocation, the agency is required to have a closeout project for them. So last year we had a voluntary reallocation, AHI. They moved a bunch of folks to emergency housing vouchers in partnership with the city of Phoenix. We worked with them on that closeout. And what did that look like? if it's a forced reallocation. So the rank and review recommended and the board approved closing out a project because they decided not to fund them based off of performance, then we would be working in tandem with those providers and figuring out, can people move on? Do they need to move to a different PSH project? So clients can't be affected even though we decided not to continue to fund that provider, if that makes sense. So that's where that number 2 fell into place, specifically the second half of number 2 and number 5. So I don't think last year there was not, I would say within the tier 1 and tier 2, we did fund, we had a partial reallocation, we had a voluntary reallocation, and they decided to fund new projects through that. They decided specifically to fund a new rapid rehousing project. Separate from all of this, there is a DV bonus that is separate from tier 1 and tier 2 in its own separate category. So would also need feedback on that. That has different requirements and different qualifications, but you have to be serving survivors of domestic violence.
So renewals, when you say renewal, I mean, when someone gets an award, do they get 3 years of an award? They get 1 year of an award, subject to just automatic renewals for indefinite?
Nothing is automatic. They have to compete every single year for their application. So they fill out a scorecard. The only, it's a 1 year grant. The only caveat to that is grants that were awarded last year have not completed a full year of funding. So they are held harmless until they have completed a complete year of grant funding. So anybody who was awarded last year, that rapid rehousing project and that DV rapid rehousing project are held harmless at the top of our tier 1 until they've completed that full 1 year and have outcomes from that first year that can be evaluated. And then every grant is evaluated on their APR that they submit, not only to us, but to HUD directly through SAGE. Liz, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I think the key thing is in number 1, we're saying preference to renewal projects who score highly. So it's not just a set standard renewal. You must first score highly. And then of course it's, hey, you've been in operation for a period of time. You're scoring in the ways in which our system is needing you to. We would want to prioritize those projects over maybe somebody writing and talking about all the great things they're going to do, but not yet having a period of time where they've been able to show performance. I do think, that 3 could maybe be updated. So rather than taking into consideration the number of family and single beds in comparison with family and single population, really, I think what we might be looking for more, and maybe this helps Lisa, is take into consideration the interventions in which people are scoring for and achieving the greatest outcome. And then that would be a prioritization. So if the by name list has a lot of individuals who are scoring for rapid rehousing and we don't have enough of that resource in our system, and we see that those programs are getting good outcomes, and that could be a part of the ranking process and prioritization. And then for 5, I think that's more of a protocol for like a response. I don't think that should be included when we're talking about how we're prioritizing projects. And then I feel like 6 is a repeat to 2. And what I think is really important for us to start looking at as like, yeah, we only get the certain amount of money every single year. And oftentimes it goes to the same individuals who are currently in housing. So I think that we need to start looking at projects that have move on strategies and can verify that they've implemented some move on within their projects, just throwing this out there. And then the other one, I know in the NOFO, they're really looking for leveraging housing resources and healthcare resources. So if we're thinking about kind of aligning with what HUD is looking for, then projects that leverage healthcare and housing resources, or just leverage match in general, I think, would be necessary so we can spread our dollar as far as we can.
Liz, I want to go back to what you said about deleting 3 and taking into consideration 4. Did you, or what's now 3 and 4, you want to remove 3 and instead have 4? And did 4 actually capture what you were looking for?
I think, yeah, open definitely for like group discussion around it. But if we're talking about rank and review for our projects, most are permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing. We're trying to just define if we think we need more coordinated entry or HMIS, but it currently just says take into consideration number of family and single beds in comparison with the family and single population. So that just doesn't seem like it's kind of getting what we're looking for. More so from my perspective is like, look at our by name list, look at the members that are in need of intervention. What interventions are they scoring for? And so we'd want to take into consideration that when we're doing rate and review, if that makes sense. And I would open it up for everyone else in the room.
Yeah, I think this one last year was talking about, because we operate two parallel systems, if we were just putting more beds into the single side or into the family side, is it really reflective of our system as a whole? So our COC funding should be about 15% focused on families because our by name list is about 15% families.
Okay, I got that. So yeah, we would need to maintain that so we can ensure we continue to have that family to single split.
Yeah, Katie, I think it's a yes and what she said and what you said.
Liz, I heard you say this, but I didn't hear your opinion on this or anybody else's opinion so far. But focus on where does new housing projects fall into prioritization and where does infrastructure fall into prioritization?
Can I ask a question about that? And it's like, we're in the process of this whole thing around coordinated entry. I don't know how will the application process be able to delineate the gap from what they have, what both providers have and need? Do you understand? I don't know if I'm gonna be able to say this right. How do we say we're gonna prioritize infrastructure if we don't actually know what the need is going to be yet there with whatever changes are going to be implemented in coordinated entry? Because I think they have to have enough money to do whatever needs to be done. I don't know how we'll know what that is or how you could say that that's more important than somebody actually being housed if we don't know it's a solid thing. I don't know. I had COVID since I got back, just so you know. I'm clearly testing negative now and have been for several days, but I don't think I think right anymore.
Cricket, are you saying we need to wait and see the final coordinated entry evaluation before
Well,
we can have
yeah, I don't
the
know how it's all gonna gel out, like for timing. And if we don't know something early enough, it'll be too late. And then we're gonna be another year behind if that's something that we need to have additional funding at. So I guess I need to know if has there been any thought about what that looks like? Or is there anything in the application process that will give us the information to be able to know what the actual need is?
Yeah, so they're required to answer all of that. And the evaluation has been released. It's on our website. You all have it. Their application is required to answer all of those questions as to how are they going to meet the need. Something that we have been talking about internally quite a bit is their grant has never increased since we approved coordinated entry in HMIS. HMIS got a bonus 2 years ago that they have then put into play. Unlike all of the other grants, like all the housing grants, they also don't increase from a supportive services standpoint, but do from an admin perspective. And their match has to go up their match is 25% of their grant. So every single time rents go up, they have to continue to provide match. So unlike those grants that are continuing to increase because of fair market rents and all of those different elements, your coordinated entry grant has not increased and your HMIS grant has increased once since it was initially approved.
And there'll be budgets included in that because I know like some of the funders that I used to be affiliated with are not funding certain aspects that they were funding before, which I think also is like in my head as I'm thinking about how do we have good outcomes if we're not funding that infrastructure piece, but I don't know how we'll know what the actual need is. Okay, here's an example. If there's going to be an actual implementation of a pilot that then is implemented, it could look entirely different in what it takes or doesn't take. And we don't know that yet as the board, right? Because it hasn't been decided. So it's hard for me to tell you.
Yeah, I would say the pilot is only one element of it, right? So the pilot's only the assessment. So you have access prioritization and referral still outside of that. And so I wouldn't anticipate, if anything, I think the pilot and implementation of the new assessment is going to be less than the VI. That's not to say though that they are still overburdened because we haven't increased funds there. So, and I don't think what by the time this takes place, these funds, the pilot will already be said, done and gone because these funds are not taking place. They won't even start until 2024. So by then the pilot will already have, we're thinking about launching a pilot in the next 2 months.
Right.
So,
But we'll make these funding decisions before we have the results of that pilot and then what we're gonna do after that, I guess is what I'm saying. And I get that that's just the process. I just needed to say it out loud. Like, I can't answer you. I don't know that I can answer you about infrastructure unless like, hopefully the rank and review committee be able to really spend time getting super close with those applications and can come up with a recommendation. And I guess my request would be that on those infrastructures that that when the recommendations are presented to us, that we understand the whys around whatever they're doing, more than just, like often, here's what we're going to do and why. Like, I think that there's an evaluation part of that that looks a little bit different than a permanent supportive housing project or critical thinking involved, I guess.
I'd like to go back because I'd like to see something typed up in number 1. I don't feel like my input was captured. And I'd like some discussion on the point of, with the exception of rapid rehousing, I would say in number 1, the fact is, there will not be other providers who can get rapid rehousing dollars if it's an automatic, as long as they score high, renewal. And there are other rapid rehousing projects. So what I would say is, with the exception of rapid rehousing, and then open that for discussion, I'm okay with, now that I understand the permanent supported housing, keep your people in housing under number 2. But if you want to incentivize more people who are doing rapid rehousing, who I think that's the only way you can do it.
so Lisa, I just want clarity around this. If you put the exception of rapid rehousing in number 1, that means permanent supportive housing projects are going to jump into your tier 2 and be defunded.
What do you mean?
We don't have enough money. So,
but wouldn't you compare rapid rehousing to rapid rehousing projects?
no, it's just all compared housing projects. So everybody scores housing projects. So we have $35 million, $32.5 million of that is into tier 1 and $2.5 million is into tier 2. These are all intermixed, rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing projects. And it's just based off of scoring high versus scoring low. So the same way, those individual metrics within the scorecard are a little bit different for rapid rehousing versus permanent supportive housing. For example, in the first question, I'm going to butcher this, but it's about how many disabling conditions people have when they're referred into the project. We ask PSH projects to more percentage have to be 3+ conditions comparatively to rapid rehousing, because theoretically we'd be referring a less co-occurring conditioned client into rapid projects. So, but they're both scored out of 5 points. And it's like, I want to say it's 44%. I'm butchering this. Some percentage, a higher percentage have to have 3+ for PSH. And then for rapid, it's 2+, and it's like less, it's 20% have to have 2+ conditions. But we're comparing all housing projects, and then you have to compare infrastructure projects to those housing projects also. We don't separate PSH, and this is how much PSH we're funding, and this is how much rapid we're
Well, then
funding.
why would we give preference to renewal projects? Because that's what I guess I don't understand. Why would we even have that?
So there's currently people in those projects that we are funding. So with PSH folks, we have people in those, and we're trying to keep those people in that housing. If they don't stay, then we have to find a different place to put them.
I get that part.
On on our scorecard also, it is much harder to score well as a renewal application than as a new application. Because as a renewal application, you are getting scored based off of the outcomes that you had versus a new application, you're getting scored based off of what you say you're going to do. And we have no way to hold you to that. So historically, all of our new projects have scored significantly higher than our renewal applicants. So if you are a high scoring renewal project, you're probably doing pretty well in performing that rapid rehousing project or that permanent supportive housing project.
I'll just
I'm-
add.
I'm not getting it. I'm not getting it because a renewal is going to get a preference over a high scoring rapid rehousing new project. Or is there a certain amount that's available for new and a certain amount, there's just one pot?
I wish we had printed out like last year's list, because you can see even a new project might score like above like several of these renewal projects, and it would automatically then go into tier 1. And I think number 2 kind of really gets to your point, Lisa, is like if something's really scoring low and we see that big cliff, like there are a bunch of 90s and then all of a sudden a 70, that's where we're going to cut the line and say, hey, let's talk about these ones that score that are below that sort of cliff. And of those, we're going to prioritize the PSH projects because they have people in them, but not prioritize the rapid projects that don't. You know, they're already scoring really poorly. They might not be worth a renewal. So, but let's definitely like prioritize the folks in the PSH as opposed to the rapid
So
in those cases.
I think I'm saying the same thing. The preference is to permanent supported, but for rapid, there's not going to be a preference to renewal of rapid programs. Is that correct?
Everyone scores their, it depends on how they do on their application. So a new application could be the number 1 scoring proposal on here and and get funded. Whereas a renewal could be all the way at the bottom. And then no, that renewal would not be, a PSH would be prioritized over that rapid if it were at the
So
bottom.
2 equally scoring rapid housing projects, one was already getting funded, would get renewed. The other one may not get renewed, even though it's new, because it's new. The old one will get if they're the same score. No?
So here, this is the exact ranking right from last year. So all of the people, you can see the score on the left side here of all of the different people. Line 27 is where our tier 2 started. So you can see that line 28 actually got scored second over line 27 because line 27 was a renewal PSH versus line 28 was a new rapid rehousing project. So that is where that difference came in. And even 27 scored above 29 also because it was a PSH program comparatively to a rapid project. That was just the decision from last year based off of the recommendations from last year. So that's kind of where the difference came in. You can see that here, and take these all with a grain of salt because scoring has slightly changed based off of a new scorecard. So this is all relative to last year. But all of the top scores, numbers 5 through 26, those are just intermixed projects of rapid and PSH based off of their score on the left side.
Okay, I just read it to indicate renewals, preference for renewals of all housing projects is how I read that number 1 before.
So
I guess
it's a
it doesn't-
preference to all high scoring projects is really like the essence of last year's scoring. So
So it's not a preference for ones that are already in the system. Go back to the language for a second. So what you're telling me, I just misunderstood.
So when you say high scoring, is it tier 1? That cliff that we're talking about? I mean, because that seems to be really important that we figure that out before you almost have to answer any of the other questions. So when you say high scoring, is that factoring what you're looking at a tier 1 allocation?
yes. So I think it's really hard to say what is a high scoring application because the scorecard changes. So we can't say like over X score. And so really this is where that like cliff comes into play of number 2 is So last year we had a cliff at 78. It jumped from 83 to 78 versus everybody else was within 5 points of each other. So that's when we defined the cliff. Tier, it's difficult to also say, like, theoretically those people become tier one, but your tier one versus tier two is all about money. So when you run it out of money, we run the scores, and then we run the scores with discretionary points. And then that is when things fall in place. So you could have, if everybody is doing amazingly who are renewals or new projects, and they all scored within, you may still have high scoring people who fall into tier two because our programs are doing so well. That may also not be the case. And I can tell you it's not the case, because we have people that fall on the bottom side of that cliff. And then you all have to decide if you are open to reallocating those projects in order to bring new players in, or if you're going to continue to fund those people who have gotten the funding.
That's exactly my point. Yeah. I mean, continue with those who were funded, or reallocate and allow new players, new people to come in. And I don't know. It seems like the preference is to people who are already getting funded. From the language there, but I'll leave it alone. You're telling me that's not the case.
Maybe we underline highly in number one, who score highly. And then we open it up for conversation on how we want to proceed. But from my perspective, it's priority to renewal projects who score highly. So those who do not score highly, even if you're a renewal, you would be at risk of being replaced by a new project.
I think that's the language. Thank you, Liz, for saying it that way. Technically, you are replacing funding. So like we have to defund a renewal project in order to fund a new project. So that's where this comes into play, is you do, like, a new project is replacing a renewal project. So this is where, like, we start with renewal projects, period, because that is the 35.3 million is what is currently funding the renewal projects. So we take their list of renewal projects, and then you're taking out people who are not scoring highly, to Liz's point, and then you're competing for new projects. So that is the people that you are looking to. We're not starting with like new projects coming in, because there isn't new money on the table to come in. It is all old money that we then have to decide, are we replacing old projects, or are we leaving them as is?
I do suggest we kind of update the language in some of this, Katie, where we kind of stick with the word preference throughout. So we're clear that it's how they're prioritizing and doing their rank and review. For instance, like for lower scoring renewal projects, we would say like priority given to, preference given to permanent supportive housing projects over rapid. And then, do you see where I'm going with this? So for 3, we would say preference given to interventions that maintain equitable levels for families versus singles. Do you see where I'm going?
Yes.
It is my worst fear doing this live, so don't make fun of me.
While you're doing that, I have a question. Did we add to one with the exception of rapid rehousing? Because that wasn't there, huh?
I wanted that to at least be there.
Because I don't know what the exception would be then. Would it be we're not gonna, regardless of what their scores are? I don't know what that means, so I can't talk about it. So we're gonna give a preference to renewal projects who score highly, except if they're rapid rehousing, then their score doesn't matter. Or it's like I'm just trying to understand what you're asking.
The intent was to not give an automatic preference to every renewal project just because, so that there would be open competition for new projects with existing projects. That was the And you're right, that language doesn't capture that. But that's not how it works.
I think we should remove that. Sorry.
And I think some of this is about the way HUD structures it. Like I remember having a intense conversation at United Way one time. I was really upset about something, and it's like, okay, but we're operating within the scope of the rules that HUD gives us. And so to fund somebody else, you're defunding something. And after having lived through voluntarily withdrawing, it is a thing. Like, and people get stuck and caught. I think we did a really good job, and everyone was transitioned to a housing voucher, but not everyone has found housing other than where they were. I mean, there's a lot involved in the piece of it, I guess, that until you've done it, I wouldn't have thought it was that big of a deal.
I will also say one of the things that we are scored on as a COC is if we have reallocated 20% of our grants over the last 5 years. So HUD is constantly asking you to do better and be better with the limited funding they are giving you. And if we aren't reallocating, we have to explain to them why we are not reallocating.
What does that mean? I don't know what you mean by reallocating.
So reallocating is when you take funding and you defund a renewal project and instead fund either a new project or an expansion or some other infrastructure. So that's saying, like, I'm going to pick on you. CBI, you are not scoring high enough. We are going to take away that funding and give it to a new project coming in.
Yeah, I get it. That makes sense to me, because how do you incentivize competition among providers if it's an automatic renewal for the ones who get it all the time? Foundations limit people to 3 years of funding. So a lot of big foundations, because they want to see also that you're working on sustaining yourself in other ways too. So it is to incentivize competition, which is what I was trying to get at altogether. So
It's also performance-based, right? It's not just you're automatically granted a renewal. No, it really depends on your performance and your scoring.
And I don't know if you were on the board yet, but when, because I was for this one, but the scorecard is where I think that's where the real conversations happen. Like, what are we going to hold as important? So by the time we get to here, we've already said what's important. So now you're going to have these people in this room for like 3 days. Okay, Katie just gave me 4 days. And it is intense, the conversation. There's a lot that goes into it. And so I think this is just how do we provide guidance to that group so that they don't bring back something and us go, what the heck? We wanted, all the money to go to, I don't know. I can't think of anything snarky, but like I just think this is like phase 2. The important part, not that this isn't important, because it is, but the stage has already been set. The scoring mechanism has already happened. We can't change that. So then what are we going to do with the scores that this board that system has already been approved? Sean?
So I was just going to make one quick suggestion in the intro to number 1, to maintain HUD allocation and to follow guidance as far as highly scoring projects and maintaining individuals as stable within the program. Do you get where I'm going with this? Like what you talked about with permanent supportive housing, if we change providers, we need to make sure that the client is not negatively impacted. So what the whole goal of this is to encourage those who are renewal projects to bring their best and score as high as possible during this process. And if not, then they will be ultimately, if they are not among those highest scores, that they will be replaced. So I think the sentence having a little more beef to it would be more descriptive and provide a better understanding of what that preference to renewal projects really does identify, instead of it being just a 3 or 4 word piece. And I'm going to be quiet before I make
that makes a lot of sense. And I'm sorry to spend so much time on this. I think the first number 2, preference given to PSH over rapid rehousing projects. I don't even know why you need one lower scoring renewal.
Because that's just for the ones at the bottom there, like
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
for the cliff.
My issue is with number one, preference to renewal. And then it does say who score highly, but there's still a preference to renewals over everything. So one high scoring PSH that's new, the other PSH gets a preference over it. But I agree with you, the language to describe, because compliance with HUD makes sense. So I don't know if you can come up with language like that, and I'd be happy to work on it with you.
So sorry that I'm virtual, but is someone not speaking into the mic? It's my apologies, but
I'm sorry. I think I just turned it off instead of.
thank you.
The scores should identify people who are not performing well. I don't think we want to just, because someone's a new rapid rehousing project, oh, here we come, we're going to let you take the funding from an existing program that we have information on how they're performing. So if they are performing poorly, they will not be highly scoring, and then that money can be reallocated to someone who may perform better. We don't even know that because it's a non-existent program, or at least non-existent through this funding. And I understand what you're saying, because I've said that a lot about PSH for a long time, but after having lived through the last 6 months of wrapping up a project, it is a major thing to close one down. And that's why I was saying before, like, we're talking about people's lives, not about the program providers. There's people caught up in this. So if they're if they're scoring well, then why would we want them to be replaced?
I think part of it is you've committed funding to contracts and leases and people's rental assistance when it's scattered site. It's different when it's project based. And we haven't had reallocations where it's just a new provider that comes in and takes over all those existing leases. When you're getting new applications, it's generally for a different population. It's for people that they want to assist. It's trying to house additional people, not just the same people through a different company. So it's not always fluid. And we've had to have a number of transitions for PSH projects, and it is quite challenging when those close down to find places for all of those people within other grants, because we have made a commitment to house those people through PSH.
Okay, I am going to, we need to start to wrap this up and take action on this. So I am going to summarize what I think I've heard, and then I still have some questions that I need you all to answer. So this preference to renewal projects for scoring highly on the notice of funding opportunities, that getting held with for lower scoring renewal projects, preference given to permanent supportive housing over rapid rehousing projects. That is also being held with the understanding that we want the COC application to reflect our population in the community. So about 15% are families, about 15% of our application to HUD should be families. We got rid of one done. A preference to consideration how projects are how clients are scoring on the by name list to be reflective of the resource needed in the community. So for example, if 20% of our folks are scoring for PSH, 20% should be PSH. That is very off kilter in our community, but that was the example I gave for you. Liz, I'm going to pause on the move on strategies and leveraging healthcare. That does come up in our interview questions, which is the next thing on this, is like how projects are already getting scored on move on strategies and leveraging healthcare and housing resources in their scorecard. So I just want to hold that for a second and come back to it. I heard the removal of partial reallocations because the rank and review committee should just reallocate if we have low scoring people. And then I heard the removal of what is now 8, because that was already said in number 2.
One thing real quick, I don't know if it's Dylan. I think you did a fantastic job of combining 3 and 4. Whoever wrote the preference given to interventions that reflect the resources needed, including the proportion of family and single beds in the region. So seems like we could strike out 4.
Yeah, sorry, I guess like clarity, are they different or are they, okay. Thanks, Liz.
All right, so to touch on move on strategies, we ask that of people in both move on strategies and the move on strategy we asked in the permanent supportive housing interview questions, how they're doing that and to talk about that. And then the leveraging healthcare and housing resources, we ask all new projects to talk about how they are doing that. So that is a requirement and they are scored on that in the interview questions, which are part of what is brought to you all. I still need guidance from you all as to how you want to prioritize infrastructure comparatively to housing projects to help us guide, rank, and review.
Just clarity on that. When you say that, is that their base funding or renewal funding?
Their renewal funding, your rank review and reallocation policy states that their base funding is held, and HUD's guidance is that it is held in tier 1, not scored. So this would be expansion, new money for them to do the work.
I feel like we, probably should have been hearing from them a lot more. And like I think someone said before, like seeing an analysis or a proposed budget of what their need is. Because I don't know that, I think from everything I know in the community and in our meetings, that we lack rapid rehousing resources, we lack actual permanent supportive housing resources, we are actually filled in our current programs, and so we're not even going to be able to house anybody new. So from my perspective, without seeing any other analysis from them or request, that would be a low priority on our rank and review.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, where do you want to rank infrastructure comparatively to housing projects? So this is going to be your coordinated entry costs and your HMIS cost. So right now, their grants have stayed, HMIS has increased 3 years ago, and coordinated entry has not increased since it was brought into the fold in 2015. 2015? I'm looking at one of the two of you. Yeah. And so those we have had voice to us that they are understaffed. But to Liz's point, you all may have not have heard that. So the question is, if you are looking at reallocating funding that is currently going into housing projects, where do you want that funding potentially reallocated to? Do you want a list brought with infrastructure is the question.
You had something in there that Liz had added about healthcare. I want to expand on that, Liz, when you were saying leveraging healthcare and housing.
So the HUD preferences for new projects that you put in, are you leveraging healthcare resources and are you leveraging housing resources? This is something that is already in your scorecard and in your interview questions, which is hopefully something we will get to in the next 5 minutes.
The only thing though, Katie, is it's added to the new projects, but if we're, it's great that they've got this vision, but I don't see any problem with also having folks write to the work they're doing to try to incorporate it in renewal projects. And so it's not currently in their questions for renewal. So if there was some kind of a preference in our rank and review, then we could capture it there too.
Can you repeat that again, Liz?
Yeah, and let me pull up the language real quick. So HUD has that partnering with housing, health, and service agencies is one of their policy priorities. And
Yeah.
so it currently is covered in the question when we ask for it for renewal questions down below in the agenda, but it's not, sorry, for new projects, but it's not covered in renewals. So if we also had them speak to how they're partnering with healthcare agencies and leveraging resources in renewal applications, and then it was scored and rank and review for that, it would help us just to further prioritize it in our system.
Liz, HUD does not score, they only score us for new projects in leveraging housing and healthcare. So and that's not to say in interview questions, we shouldn't also ask this of renewal, but HUD is only asking us to do that on new projects. So because we can't expect somebody to change the model that they are already operating and to now do that leveraging. So that is how HUD has been looking at it.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think it's just understanding like the essence of the reason why they're asking, and then, you know, either including it in preference. So if they're able to articulate the ways in which they've leveraged the healthcare system, then that's great. It would be one of the preferences in rank and review, or in the questions below, when we ask about innovation to manage challenges, we could just give a guiding kind of prompting question there that talks to specifically describe your leveraging of the healthcare system.
We're going to have a current rank and review member give us some feedback because he's here in the audience. Nate.
Hi, everyone. Nathan Smith, Phoenix Rescue Mission. I'm really thinking I've been on rank and review quite a few times. So I think that number one, it is meant to capture what it's meant to capture, in the sense that if someone is doing really, really well and they're taking care of people really well, then let's let them keep taking care of people really well. But there are those ones at the bottom that when you're in rank and review, they score poorly and you wonder why we keep funding them. So I think, Lisa, to your point, at the very bottom, we should definitely consider not funding those when there may be a new player who could do really, really well. And then also on the only thing I'd just maybe ask the board to consider is when you're talking about infrastructure, one of the things that comes up quite a bit, I think of from COC committee perspective, is anytime there's quarterly trends reports, or, you know, anytime the data comes out, we always ask the question, what's behind that? What's causing? Are there any correlations to that? And I think I remember hearing in at least the presentations and rank and review in the past that HMIS has wanted to invest into that a little bit, to have some staff to be able to chase the whys behind the data some. So if maybe they brought something like that to the table in an application, you might consider that as a gap. I know, to Liz's point, we hear a whole lot about what's wrong with the housing world. That's the one thing I hear from the infrastructure world that if I were you, I'd at least consider.
Thanks, Nate.
I'm thinking about your question regarding infrastructure and how we should prioritize it. And since we don't know what the ask is, it's hard to know like what the impact, at what cost, right? Since they're all in the same pool, it's going to come from somewhere. And we don't have any idea to predict what that is, right? So maybe infrastructure increases are considered at the line, at the cliff level. And depending upon, like, leave it up to the rank and review committee to determine the merit of the request based upon what's in the application. But if it's merited by, you know, if they feel like it's merited, that should be a priority in the lower.
Okay.
So when there's a cliff, prioritize infrastructure as long as it's merited within the application, as long as rank and review feels like it's a worthy ask.
And that would be prioritized, correct?
Without a mic, prioritization over housing. So Dylan, if you could add language around consideration of infrastructure.
Yes.
You all can have rank and review can bring you up to 7 lists. So it sounds like one of those lists that you all are curious about could be an infrastructure priority over a housing priority. So we will bring that recommendation to them.
So that we'll know the impact of what what it's, what it's gonna cost either way. Because we'll have choices. This group will have choices.
And then I think, oh,
I was just going to say, Katie, you mentioned an important thing for probably new members, the 7 lists, one of which is raw score, correct? Okay. And some of these questions, are these discretionary on different lists on how we rank them? So you'll always see the raw score. So you'll always see everybody on the list. But if you haven't scored it up to 7 different ways, you wouldn't know which one to actually vote on, correct?
Correct. So our rank and review policy got changed last year. The first list that gets brought to you is just raw scores. The second list is raw plus discretionary points, which are awarded by rank and review. Lists 3 through 7 are based off of board recommendations. So this is based off of everything that you all are talking about right now. And as much as this was a really good conversation, this is really helpful for staff going into rank and review to listen to what you all are grappling with so we can provide guidance to rank and review committee. So they may come back to you and list 3 may be PSH housing. List 4 may be rapid housing that is in your lower tier 2, kind of in that after the cliff. List 4, 5, list 5. Maybe infrastructure right at that cliff. So and then they will be giving you guidance and they have to recommend one list for you all to adopt. However, as the board, you can adopt any list. However, if you are receiving funding, you are not allowed to vote in that. I will note that now.
we've got a good list that we've talked a lot about, although Liz's comments about the renewal projects with the leveraging healthcare and housing, I don't know if that's maybe the next conversation about interview. Can we move that to the interview questions, Liz? Does that fit right there?
Yeah, that's fine. I think this language on number 4, though, I want to be very cautious with. So we're asking them to consider new infrastructure expansion projects over new housing projects. Can't we ask them to consider both without placing over if they're going to end up providing us with 2 lists? I would hate for these 5, whatever amount of people to be the determining factor of that particular.
Yes, we're making that adjustment, Liz.
Would you, you take the housing project part out. And in the stuff that Nate was saying about data, one can contribute to, I don't know if you want to get that specific in the language, to our knowledge of what? I don't know.
That looks good.
Are they new infrastructure projects?
Yeah, they're considered new.
Would be new if they, so to get an in. Okay.
Because they're.
Sorry, I'm talking without my mic. The question was, are these new projects, and an expansion is technically considered a new project?
Do we like these 4?
Yes.
Would anyone be interested in making a motion on these 4?
So moved.
Thank you, Chris.
Seconded.
Thank you, Cricket. We have a motion from Chris Hallett, a second from Cricket Weatherington. For those in the room, we're going to do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Yeah.
Hey.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. And Katie, if you wouldn't mind doing roll call for those online.
Jessica Cruz.
Yes. Yay.
Liz DeCoste.
Yay.
Charles Sullivan.
Yay.
Sienna Valdez.
Yay.
Thank you. Danielle Wright.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. And I just want to thank Rank and Review for all their work they're going to be doing here soon. And very excited to not be a part of it this year. In addition, though, we need to approve our interview questions. These were also included in the packet. And I know we just discussed maybe talking about adding one on leveraging resources to the renewal projects. So have we all had a chance to review these, and is there some discussion on these?
So yeah, the one thing I would add to, I want to suggest that we add to the renewal projects is under describe how you've been innovative in addressing challenges. We tried to lead them a little bit more into describing their leveraging healthcare and potentially even move on strategy interventions.
All right, is everyone following that? Do we know which question we're?
That's question 2 on the renewal applications. And the question is, currently, what innovative practices are you using to address the challenges within your program, and how are you applying these practices? And Liz, your recommendation is to say, what innovative practices and resources are you leveraging to address the challenges?
Yeah, we could say that, or even specifically describe how you leverage healthcare resources and move on strategies. But I'll leave it to Dylan to make it pretty.
Liz, number 5 is, how are you supporting move on strategies?
Okay, even for renewal, then yeah, then we can just stick with the leveraging housing resources, healthcare resources, sorry.
All right, everyone okay with those changes on the interview questions? Would anyone care to make a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Chris.
Seconded.
Thank you, Sean. We have a motion from Chris Hallett, a second from Sean Pierce. All those in the room, I should follow my, we're going to do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say yay.
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 Any opposed? All right, Katie, can we do the roll call for folks on the phone?
Jessica Cruz,
Yes.
Liz DaCosta,
Yay, and thank you for the discussion.
Charles Sullivan,
Yay.
Sienna Valdez,
Yay.
Danielle Wright.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item number 9. The next item is a request for future agenda items. Do board members have any action or discussion items for future meetings?
Yes, sorry, can we get an update from our subcommittee? I think specifically coordinated entry around the resources that they need, that they've identified that they need to support coordinated entry.
So from the coordinated entry subcommittee? Cricket?
Yes, please.
I'm trying to figure out my words. I would like to see coordinated entries committee give us updates until we get through whatever we're doing, more than in writing, so that we can hear. It's live and active and changing every couple of weeks in meetings, and we can be making decisions without knowing where they're actually at it. And I support not having a million updates from everybody, but I think that that's really in a super changing place right now, and I want to know what's happening. I actually sent a question to Katie saying, okay, so like it said in the update that they were going to do a pilot this month, but it's not happening, as I said before, which is fine. I mean, it's going to happen, but not on this time scale. And so then what, like it, I think there's a little bit of a lag with something that's quite so dynamic.
So a comprehensive coordinated entry update along with some discussion about how the pilot's
Yeah,
going.
and sort of ongoing, and it doesn't have to be necessarily every month, but you know, if it's even every other month, or when it's when what's in the newsletter is drastically different than when we meet, we need to hear from them, because otherwise it's 2 months in the lag.
Good. Any other requests from board members for future agenda items? Okay, moving on to item 10.
My
Yes.
birthday's in October. Can we put that on there?
Yes, it's already on Cricket.
Okay, good. Just making sure.
Board member roundtable. I want to open the floor for a roundtable of announcements, events, challenges that you want to address, or opportunities to come together for new ideas. Do any board members have updates for the roundtable today?
This is Vicky with Community Bridges. I will just move that we are moving to the acquisition of Rio Fresco Shelter. So we're extremely excited about that new endeavor. So thank you to the community, and we look forward to continued work with the Rio Fresco Healing Center.
Congratulations.
Uh, 24th Street and University. They'll extend to suites.
Any board members online have anything for the roundtable? Any board members in the room have anything for the roundtable?
I'll just real quick say, I feel like I've talked a lot today. The National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference had this giant sellout super quick. And so a lot of people weren't able to go. I think they said there were 1,600 people on the waiting list at the launch on Tuesday or Wednesday. I think it was a really good conference. One of the things that they spent quite a bit of time like behind the scenes talking about is some of the legislation coming up and what are we going to be doing about, what are they doing about that? So they'll be releasing some new video series like the criminalization one regarding people with lived experience and frontline workers and how underfunded systems affect clients through those lenses. I think that was pretty amazing. And we had great Capitol Hill visits, not great attendance, but we were able to see, I think we saw 6 people, 4 representatives and 2 senators that day. By the way, it's hot there and on the map, it doesn't look that far to go from where the House of Representatives office are to the Senate. It's very far. But it was really great. And we had people with lived experience that were highly effective. Not even, these were people that are currently receiving services, not even employed in the system at all. And they were really effective at talking, and I think it was a great experience. So just wanted to let you know that that was a good thing. And I'm sorry you all weren't there with me.
Awesome. Well, I heard Arizona was well represented though. Thanks for representing us, Cricket. All right. If with no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everyone.